Thank you. Good evening, dear friends. What an unusual way to do a way-seeking mind talk. I really wish I'd got all your physical bodies shoulder to shoulder with me to earth me, really. I'm quite shy about these sort of things, and I'd much prefer to be in the background setting up these spaces for others. So yeah, there's a great uncomfortable shaking in my little heart at the moment, and I've not got your little bodies to like touch. But I've set myself up with little pieces of you around me, physical like objects that at times people have given me. So I've got you physically in some way. So this is a love story for your Monday evening. Emily, Amy, Willie, Bill, George, Kathleen, Richard, Janet, Rian, Gary, Pat, Roger, Nick, John, Christine, Andrew, Simon, Spark, Eric, Mel, Dawn, Dave, Andy, Barbara, Elaine, Scott, Lee, Pete, Tom, Dean, Sandra, Yvonne, Donna, Abbas, Sonia, Patsy, Rachel, Sam. I could have just spoken names to you for 40 minutes, really, I think. And I did consider just speaking names because that's my life. My life has been all the relationships that I've been blessed to have, and all the people and landscapes that this body has absorbed. And I am nothing other than that. So these, whatever I might say is me in here or my, none of it is at all. It's utterly everybody that's been in my life, all of you included, and everyone I've just spoken, and literally hundreds of other people that I've been blessed to connect with during my life. So really it feels like a very, it's not a unique story at all, and it's very ordinary. And really it's just the story of everyone else that's passed through me. There was a beautiful quote from Suzuki Roshi that I read when I was sort of researching this. Our way has no end and no beginning. From this way we cannot escape. Our way has no end and no beginning. From this way we cannot escape. So it's one story of multiple stories of loss and love that I've been graced with during my life. I've literally heard hundreds of others way-seeking mind talks that's completely transformed me and melted my own story through theirs, really. Because I started my life and I was a very sort of almost mute in some ways, I think, very frozen around speech. So it's been hearing other people's stories that I think has melted parts that have been trapped in here. And I know Claire sort of talked about the pool of life, the sort of symbolism of water, which was really beautiful. And a symbolism that often comes to me of these stories is the alchemy food pot of life. And food's been a really important part in my life and my family's life. That's definitely a way that we've transmitted love to each other through the giving and offering of food. And it feels like my life has just been this sort of, which is often used as symbolism, isn't it, of this tenderizing and this slow cooking and the marinading of all of us together. So we're all like completely infused through our pores of each other. And as I say, I've heard hundreds of stories, both through friendship and through, but especially through work, of people's own lives of loss and suffering. A quote which I really love is, "Where the wave meets the rock is where Buddhas are born." And this again links to this love story of relationship, really, and how we are changed through the meeting of each other. And the story that we have of those events, I think, rather than the actual event, then sort of leads us in different directions. And that's definitely one thing that the practice has shown me, to not abide in the fixed stories and to take the stories a lot less seriously about myself and others. So that's the relationship, just the feeling of this relationship with people and stories, and also how those people's stories have definitely touched me through music has been a very important part of my life. And I think some of my first Zen teachers were lyrics through music that opened me to the absolute, definitely. And that continues to be a really important source in my life, and another place that a lot of love has been shared through friends and family, and huge connection through relationship through music I've experienced. And also I could carry on with, also with film, photography, art, landscapes, poetry, animals. And again, this sort of, I think the practice has shown me that absolutely everything is relationship. I used to think it was just housed in human bodies, and now I see it is utterly everything that I do. So there's potential in change and compassion in everything that we touch. And on reflection, there's something definitely been about relationship on the wild edges, and where things meet, especially when there's this sort of wild edge of meetings, that the potential for change and love is really obvious. And the transformative powers of those edges in life that I think when I started off, I used to try and avoid out of fear and thinking I should know what to do with them. But there's a lot more relaxation in me at those edges now, knowing that I don't have to know. And it's just learning just to be with that wildness, really. And I've got especially a big love for remote islands, which Jonathan can maybe understand. When I look through my life, some of my most peaceful, beautiful experiences have been on islands off islands, where I've gone from one tiny boat to another, to wild edges of lands where literally the ocean is meeting the rock, and I've got huge gratitude for those landscapes. So it feels like and through that, this process of landing in my body, and I still feel I'm actually landing in my body. And that makes me think of my ancestors and who my ancestors are. And I've been very lucky that quite a few of my family have been interested in doing family trees. So my most obvious ancestors in my family line, of my biological family line, I know quite a lot about. And I'm very rooted in them in where I live now, which I find very earthing again and very grounding. So the hostel that I'm sat in, that some of you will know, my mum actually worked in this hostel for years. So when I'm cleaning the toilets, Janet literally was cleaning those toilets. When I'm walking through Hebden, some of the walls that I'm brushing as I walk down to the market, my great-great-grandfather was one of the crew of stonemasons who built the walls. When I'm walking over the hills, I'm literally in the footsteps of my grandfather, who was a meat inspector and used to walk across the landscape to visit the local farms to check that they were basically looking after the animals and killing their animals in an appropriate way. There's a place just over the valley where I drive through where I go to the Lake District, and that's actually called Habergam. And that's again where a lot of my ancestors lived for hundreds of years. There's a Habergam Hall, which sounds very grand. They used to be landowners until I think they gambled it and pissed it up the wall. But I drive through the place name of where a lot of my ancestors lived. Rian goes to a pub. His favourite pub is where my great-great-grandfather used to like call in after he'd been farming the fields. So I'm really deeply like rooted in my ancestors in a very physical way in this rugged Yorkshire landscape. And I find that there's just a real comfort for me in that. And their stories of farmers and builders and midwives and tailors and teachers and all these different people that were living around. And I've got great gratitude for those stories. So we'd often talk of ancestors in the family in a very, the speech of gratefulness was really common in the family, which I'm very grateful for, that was really apparent, this gratitude to where we came from, and we're just a tiny product of that. So that was part of the family story. And I'm grateful to have known physically 5 of my great-grandparents that I can remember, and also both my grandparents on both paternal and maternal side I knew intimately, and I knew them underneath the story of that they were a teacher or a farmer, or which is sometimes what a lot of people know about the grandparents. I knew them intimately, and my grandma died a few years ago, my last grandparent, and I was very close to her in her last years and heard some really moving stories about her emotional life, and was really close to her in her death. And I feel that was such a gift, and was actually the window for a really deeper relationship with my father, because we were both around his mum dying, and that really sort of opened up my life, really. So this baby was born, or a baby, I don't know what baby, some creature was born in the Midlands in England to a Janet, which some of you will know, and she's sat here, to my mum, and a Richard, my dad, and my sister was also present. I was born at home, and I believe that a Western was on, a film, because my mum loved Westerns. So I believe I was born to like gunfire and horses. And that my sister was the first one to hold me, my sister who was 4 years older than me. I haven't got any memories of that. Some people do of their birth, haven't they? But I haven't got any memories of that. And most of the stories for my really, really first months of life that I've heard were that I was very poorly. And the milk that I was being fed that was supposed to be nourishing me was actually doing the opposite. And I got tiny, tiny, skinny baby, and I cried a lot, and my family were really worried. And it was especially difficult for my mum, because they were doing everything and I was getting really, really quite unwell. But then they realised what it was, and they put that right and changed the milk, and then stuff was good. I had a very colourful childhood. When I look back, it was very colourful. My mum and dad were kids of the 60s, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll were a big part of their life. And our house was very much a party house. I think my mum would say anyway, it was a conscious decision that their marriage was one of maybe the time of circumstance, felt they needed to get married, so it wasn't necessarily a marriage of love. So they decided to party, and it was a party house. There was a lot of going to rugby clubs, a lot of house parties, people, music, food, a lot of activity. And I met a lot of amazing people through that. It was very, very rich. My dad's a folk singer, and I think there were some very fine Zen stories in the stories that he used to sing. He still does a lot of singing. So there was a lot of music around. I remember vividly things like coming home from school and my dad would be dressed as a chicken. And my sister would be dressed as a pig, and this was just like what we did at home, you know. And I think my most intimate relationship with faith at the time and the church was we lived opposite a church. And one night at a party, my dad and his rugby friends thought it'd be a good idea to climb the church. So they went out with a dog lead and tried to climb the church. And part of the church fell on one of these rugby players, and he had to be carried home on a stretcher or something. And I remember this story being told over and over, and seeing this injured man in the front room when I got up in the morning. So we didn't have much sort of formal religion. The religion, I think, was really partying and drinking. But it was also very much, my childhood was very much the precepts in a different way were definitely being expressed. And there was so much generosity and patience and care as well. And definitely my home, if it wasn't always for me, for some people, it was definitely a place of refuge. And I remember meeting a friend from school when I was an adult, and she actually said that my home to her actually saved her life, because she could come there and be accepted and be loved, and she didn't have that at home, and that was her place of refuge, that she could just come and stay, which was really powerful. When that was a time when I was being quite critical of my childhood, to hear that from somebody, that was actually her place of refuge, was really helpful. So as I sort of hinted before, I think I was quite shy. A lot of parts of me were quite shy. So you can imagine in that party environment that was tricky at times. And often I'd feel out of my depth. It was a mixture of fun and colour, but I'd often feel a bit humiliated. There was a lot of maybe cruel humour that I really struggled with. I was often the one not wanting to dress up, so I was seen as a bit miserable or a bit mardy. So it was often quite tricky. So there was a lot of warmth and activity, but there wasn't always many boundaries or discernment. And that was really tricky at times. But I did obviously have my places of solace that I found. And my family say from a young age, I'd just be silent. I'd just decide I was going to not speak, and it could go on for hours, if not days. And I do remember this. And I also used to spend a lot of time doing headstands. There was something about being upside down and quiet that, again, just reset my body for some reason. So I spent a lot of time doing headstands and just being silent, but also a lot of time with the dog called Spark. Animals have been really, really important to me. So a lot of time with the dog and in front of the fire. And my grandparents, especially my maternal grandparents, their place was definitely a place of refuge for me throughout my life until my adult life. So I had quite an anxious little body that often felt a lot of panic, but I think I masked it really well. And I remember going to school, my primary school, and like people would call me Smiler. A lot of the old guys on the benches going down to school would call me Smiler. And in some ways I was, but in some ways I think it was a bit of a frozen smile of just like, everything's fine, just like carry on, I'm fine, don't draw attention to me. So I've had this thing for a long time of just wanting to be invisible and finding ways to be invisible. And I think just that frozen face of like, everything's fine, got me through really well sometimes, but not always. And I also used to really blush, hugely blush. I still blush, but this led to like massive social anxiety and utter terror of having to speak in public. Public, I mean, public was 2 or 3 people. That's not really public, is it? But I can remember hiding like under tables from myself to not have to go to like lectures where I had to talk. So this is just, I'm learning, but it's not really what I'd like to be doing. But yeah, so a history of like a lot of social anxiety. And a family where I think maybe found it difficult to communicate about difficult feelings. So I didn't maybe have a lot of role models of expressing difficulty. And often difficulty had come out in emotion after alcohol. So a lot of alcohol drunk at home, and a lot of emotion that was rambling around that it was difficult to process, especially for mum and dad, had come out around alcohol. And me and my mum have talked about this before this talk. For whatever conditions, I think, in my personality and the family situation, I quite quickly became in that role of sort of fixer, and almost like my mum's mum, because mum was really struggling. And the practice has been a blessing to work through these conditions of our lives, to now meet as two women, really, and things still come up, and there can be a very uncomfortable sort of slight elevating that mum can do, and I have a very strong reaction to that wherever it comes from, and it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress, and the practice is an absolute blessing for us to be unhinging ourselves from those painful knots, just ways that we had in order to cope, really. And equally, I feel very blessed that I've also got dialogue with my father. My father, in lots of ways, was very absent, and he had his own ghosts and his own needs that he was getting met in whatever ways. And it's incredible that we've now got a really beautiful relationship. But yeah, tricky, as we've all got. Like I say, none of this is original. None of this is original. You know, these are just stories of families, really. And there was also mum and dad were both very attractive, and sort of people magnets, really. And I think a mixture of that attractiveness and openness. There was a lot of difficulties around sexual conduct in the house. And it was like, I talk about alchemy pots. That was sort of the pot I was in as a kid. So I sort of absorbed that environment, really, where sexual energy was definitely a currency. And so, surprise, surprise, that's been a problem for me. And that being something that's been used as a transaction and a currency from an age too young, and not always consenting. So this has been a journey for me, really. And this is why I say it's a story of love, because that's got myself in very difficult romantic relationships. But the practice has really taught my body discernment and compassion. And I'm in such a different place now. But that's been one of my alchemy pots in intimate relationships, definitely. So I left home, and I very clearly remember making a vow when I left home to myself that I would find the place with no violence. And in some ways, when I've been looking back over this talk, that's been my journey in my life. When I left home, and surprise, surprise, I actually went to places that were at the wild edges. So I thought when I said that, oh, I'm just going to trip on the sort of moorsides and pick flowers, and I had all these like romantic dreams of maybe getting married and have 5 kids and live in a farm, and you know, this is what my non-violent place had looked like in my dream. Yeah, it's been none of that. None of that. And also, I think there was also a curiosity about what ground creates positive change, what environment creates change. So I went to uni. Only just went to uni because I was very anxious, really struggling with panic attacks at that time. But I managed to get away to uni in Manchester. But quite quickly came very disillusioned with the theory, and had a lot better life outside uni, to be honest, with friends, again, music. I worked in an amazing Mexican restaurant. and had a ball really on lots of levels, and also started volunteering. So it was my beginning of volunteering in organisations such as I was doing doing soup runs and working in the red light area with working women. And this was the beginning of hearing incredible stories and meeting incredible people that have really like opened my heart up. And also in this, my first sort of trip to an island. So my island love started at this time, where I spent a good few months on Shetland, and some of my happiest moments. And I went from little island to little island on Shetland, and the wildflowers and the just the dramatic light. There was almost 24-hour daylight. I was in a really lovely relationship at the time. A guy came up with me, and it was all very beautiful, driftwood and birds and peat cutting. And the couple I stayed with thought I'd go back and live there, because they were just like, you're just meant for this land, you know? So there was something that touched me there, that turned me in landscape as well, that I completely found peace on those wild edges in those islands, everything just falling off. Such a beautiful experience. And also this sense of being, so I was at uni, but then I had a year out because the theory wasn't doing it. I went away to work. So this sense of being a bit nomadic started then, really, and not having this, you're going to stay in one place with one person doing the same thing. And that's continued through my adulthood, really. I stopped counting when I got to 30 addresses that I've lived in. So multiple jobs, relationships, houses. I've been a bit of a pilgrim, and I used to give myself a hard time for that, but I don't anymore. That's been the way it is. And there's been multiple jobs with incredible people that I've met that have really opened me up. So I could have picked many, really, but working especially at the Simon community in Ireland was a massive sort of opening time for me. I went to work there in a homeless hostel in County Cork, and that started my love of Ireland. Beautiful link in so many ways I've had with Ireland. But I think it started to show me that actually the place of violence is also the place of love. So they're not separate places. And the more intimate stories I heard from people that lived in the hostel, actually the more love that we shared for each other. So I've got the memory of one guy, Lenny, who we were so close with each other. I mean, I was literally like shaving his head when he had head lice. He couldn't bath himself, so I was putting him in the bath and getting him out of the bath, and he'd be saying, "You bloody useless English woman," you know, to sort of like, that's how he showed his love for me. But yeah, it really showed me this sort of where those wild edges are is also where the kindness is and the love is. Because it was really quite a dangerous place. The hostel that it was on, the road was called Muggers Alley. So it was quite a dangerous hostel in some ways. And it really opened my eyes up to death working there, because I worked there for only 7 months, but there were 7 deaths. So it was a massive wake-up call for me. And 2 of those people, one who was a really good friend, was murdered. And it really shook me to the core, and still has done, actually, reflecting back on it. There's still bits in there that I can't go near, because of sort of some sense of responsibility or not being there for them. So it's been quite tricky going back to that time, I realise. And I also met Rian's dad working in the hostel. Some of you all know Gary. I also met him. He was another volunteer. That's when we got together. So very, very extreme experiences there, very extreme. I also remember one story, which again was about being fooled by appearances and my sort of frozen body that could look very in charge and very able, when actually it was terrified. So this sort of realizing there's sometimes a mask here and there's sometimes a bit of a mismatch. How are you going to unite these things? Because I remember a couple of guys saying on one night that it was really like lots of fighting going on, and we were separating them as like really immature 22-year-olds or whatever. And there were two new guys, and they said, oh, we knew it was fine because we'd look at you, Rebecca, and we felt really safe because you just wink at us. And we just knew everything was going to be all right. And I was utterly terrified. It was the most scared, I think, not most scared, but one of the most scary experiences I had that night. So there was something about this twitch in my eye that was reassuring people that actually shouldn't have been reassuring. So there was something about, don't be fooled by my appearance of what I look like. There's a lot else going on in here. And during my time there, I'd hitch over to Kerry. So my love of the west coast of Kerry started when I was in the Simon community, and in some ways it saved me, I think. So I'd work during the week or wherever, and I'd hitch over to Kerry and on my own often, and just spend my days off wandering. And after I'd finished at the Simon community, I actually went to live in Ventry, just past Dingle. And yeah, I'm still in love with that coastline. It's been a very powerful coastline in my life. And that's where Rian was conceived. So very special for that. My beautiful son, which some of you will know, who's now 25. And so obviously half of him is rooted in Ireland, with his dad being Irish. So I've had many different job experiences, many different stories, many different practice spaces, and met many people that have taught me so many things. I was thinking about one place that I worked, working with guys who had been hurting their partners in relationships because they didn't know how to love, I suppose, in the way that was being asked of them. And I learned so much from doing that. I did that job part-time for 10 years, and it was one of my most favorite jobs. And I learned so much from that. And really, that was every night hearing guys way seeking mind talks, brutally honest about the harm they'd caused their partners. And I started seeing how, in the right environment, transformation could occur. And the teachers, the people that mentored me, taught me so much about, like a Zendo, setting space up. So how they set the space up, how they laid the chairs out, how they taught me that the facilitators must always have the same chairs as the men that came in. You should never put yourself as above those guys. We've all got to be on the same level. How they absolutely work to keep it safe and tight and respectful, so these guys could voice their demons. And how I clearly saw through that environment, people's lives were changed. You know, I was completely inspired by these stories. And we had conversations with the partners as well. And sometimes it didn't work, whatever work is, but sometimes definitely the women would say, I've got my husband back. You know, the children have got their father back. And it was by this expression of their deepest, most shameful experiences that they were transformed. And that really taught me a lot about love again, through their humility and surrender just to the truth of what they've done, really. And I think especially powerful was when they had to reenact their partners. They had to put themselves in their partner's shoes and reenact what had happened to them, what they'd done to them. And from being in that shit is where the transformation happened, really. But being in it with no judgment and with care and understanding around them, that was their Zendo. It was really powerful, really powerful. And I've had numerous other examples of those teachings through people that I've worked with. And I think it's been their wholehearted, just really raw suffering that's really like broken me open out of that little girl who used to think she had to fix others and she didn't have any cries. It's been hearing just these really honest people that I'm so grateful for, that's unlocked that frozen little voice in me, definitely. And show me that there's no sort of solid perpetrator or victim, carer or service user. schizophrenic or worker, this is one of the stories of practice for me that I hear in practice and then I see at work, this reflection of there is no fixed person that is any one of those things. And especially there is no fixed helper for me, because that was my journey of my upbringing. And that is just a cry like any other. But it can be so tricky to hear that as a cry. And I also think the fixer rescuer can so go undercover in Buddy's practice. Oh, now I'm a bodhisattva. Oh, I just crack on with my samsara as before, don't I? So, yeah, that it's really like one of my personal koans, I suppose, that they're all cries. You might think you're all sorted. That's just a cry as well. And how do we take care of that in each other? And I'm lucky to have friends that give me really clear feedback. Now, really clear feedback about I see you and I see what you're doing. And so, yeah, a lot of sort of pain has manifested in lover relationships for me. And that's definitely been a habitual pattern. It's not been drugs or alcohol or shopping, or my training ground has been in lover relationships, and trying to learn through that what love is. But again, it's been quite wild on the edges of that. And I vowed to find that place of nonviolence. And this is the stuff that really touches me deep, that I didn't find that before Rian was grown, before Rian was little and experienced homes that were still violent. And that's just the way it is. And practice has really helped me just to be with that, the suffering that I experienced when I realized that, and the regrets I've got around that. But I'm very blessed that he as an adult can tell me the impact that's had on him as a child. And I can now witness that without breaking. And he can say it so beautifully without judgment, which is a great gift for me. Because I was still in that training ground when Rian was little, and I feel very sad about that. And also his dad really struggles with his mental health. So he's had a pretty wild alchemy pot himself. And there's a really stronger sense of responsibility for me in being his mum than I've got with anything else in my life. I can be a lot more gentle on myself with other things, but there's something in that mothering role for me that it's really tricky to, I don't know, it's just very sad. But I do feel that in some ways it was the violence in some relationships that literally kicked my voice out of me. And I, for some reason, maybe needed a really blunt instrument in order to stand up and rise up and found boundaries and discernment and articulate needs. So in some ways, I'm grateful. Yeah, and it's a part of me. And I can understand it in other people, maybe that I speak to every day. I can see it from another side. So let's talk a little bit about more formal practice, because that, as you can hear, that's all my practice. So much of my practice and my changing has been through the stories that I've heard. But my more formal practice, I started transcendental meditation when I was 18, when I went to uni, when I was that frightened little blushing body that was really struggling with the world meeting me. And I saw a little poster on a wall, and which, again, it's not an original story. So many people I talked to in the Zen world started off with TM in the 70s and 80s and whatever. And that was really, really helpful. And it was a real anchor for me. And it also got me relationships with other people that had a practice. And along the way, along the years, a lot of people said, oh, you should go to Sammy Ling or you should go to Throstle Hole. And I was a very arrogant, self-righteous anti-Buddhist for some reason. I realized that the less I know about something, the more self-righteous I am. So I knew nothing about Buddhism, but I knew that I didn't want to do it. Which is very, just how it seems to be for me. So it took until I was in my 30s, and a really good friend of mine who was a mentor when I did my nurse training actually got me to Sammy Ling. Nothing short of a miracle, but it was through him. I really loved him and I respected him, and so Sammy Ling was a place of refuge for me for many years. A place of refuge. Often I'd go up on my own and do the Torah prayers at 6 a.m. and then go and walk by the river and sit in the garden. It was such a beautiful place for me. And I actually took refuge with Lama Yeshe way back over, I don't know how long ago, but it was a very special place to me. But in amongst, at some point, I'd done some shiatsu training, and the bit of shiatsu training that really stuck with me was the Zen training and the Zen teachers. So that had sort of planted the little Zen seed in me through the teachers that were Zen practitioners that did the shiatsu training. And so even though I was going to Sammy Ling, I got my eye on Throstle Hole then after this point. And the guy that took me to Sammy Ling was really unhappy about that, because he was like, you have to commit, Rebecca, and you shouldn't be like going anywhere. You should just commit to Tibetan. Anyway, I went to Throstle on my own for a weekend, and that was it, really. That was it. Something in Zazen, I just came home. My head was all over the place, didn't like the ceremonies. It was too this, it was too that, blah, 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 blah. You know what the head's like. But I remember driving away from there and my heart was open in my body. Not open, but there was something going on in my physical heart. And it was like, there's something in this. There's something in this. So I'd done lots of head work and counseling and all this stuff, but never had I had this embodied shift. And then this took me on this sort of journey of the body holds the score. This is where it's at. And the journey of, I think on a cellular level, Zazen is transformative. When before it had been more thoughts, really, that had been put into my head. It was like, oh my God, there's something underneath all this rubbish. This heart is opening. And so this journey of just trusting my heart, trusting this little heart, and having a relationship with the body that actually has been tricky, because I've had so much shame about my physical body because of the conditions in my life, so much rejection of how I look and this wanting to be invisible, that I've been so detached from it. So a practice that was trying to like bring me into it, just this, meeting the core of these judgments that have been hindering relationship and connection because there'd been so much pain in there. So what a gift, what a gift. And I immediately, that was it really, that weekend at Throstle, it was Zazen. And that same weekend, somebody who I've not seen since, and I only spoke to for 10 minutes, came up to me at the tea time on the Sunday afternoon before we left and said, you need to go and sit with Reb Anderson. So, never met this guy before. He just said, I can tell you just need to go and sit with Reb Anderson. So that same year I went to sit with Reb, and that was my first session. And again, that it just a deepening of coming home, and what a relief, what a relief, what a relief. And not understanding why, and at last not having to, this permission not to know, you know, it all just, that was it. It's like the touch paper had been lit. And again, that relationship for me, you know, that this is in all our hearts, but what is it that lights it? What is it in relationship with each other that burns those embers? And I needed to be in that Zendo with those people and those teachings for this to be lit. But it was there. And the teachings as well, I think that really, for me, that it's there in everyone. They're in everyone, you know. So this sort of the equanimity, and there's no special. There's no special. Sorry, there is not a higher ground. This stuff that, of course, we all know. Of course, we do. People have been writing about this for like generations. I didn't have a clue. You know, it was just incredible. This sort of stuff that hadn't quite made sense to me, but I knew. It was just really, really powerful. Really powerful. And also in that, a really strong sense of this has got to be spread in this country. So I've been blessed to be able to go to San Francisco Zen Center, and so grateful, obviously. I mean, Ingen's here and all you that have been there, but never any desire to go and live there. So I didn't have that pang of like, that's, sometimes I had the pang of that'd be better, because I think I got that message of some people to begin with. Actually, the best training is actually going to the monastery, to the mothership. But there was this real sense that we need it here. We need to be singing these refuges in Yorkshire, you know, in Yorkshire with Yorkshire accents, and like spreading it over these valleys. You know, we need to be doing it here. And by this time, we'd got a Sangha in Hebden that had set up just a bunch of mates, really, that had been to similar retreats and were like, we knew we needed each other. And it was a Zen Sangha, but we literally just did Zazen, ate soup and talked and rang bells. That was, we didn't even know what a Rakasu was at that point, you know? So it was very much about just doing the Zazen together. But there was this sense of, we want to do it here, you know, and you've got kids, so you couldn't go to San Francisco, could you? And, you know, get in there, and you've not got the money to go, have you? So we've just got to crack on. And a real, I think, a sense of coming home to San Francisco also because of the stories of infidelity in the lineage. And also I remember reading Crooked Cucumber quite early on and hearing Suzuki's stories of suicides and daughters' mental health difficulties, and even the name Crooked Cucumber, the infidelities between teachers and students. Rather than that stuff turning me away, it made me feel at home, because that had been my life in a different way. And it was like, oh, good. You don't have to have this elevated purity of teacher in order to be welcome here. There's me as well that's had this whatever I thought was misshapen past. So that actually made me feel at home rather than turned me away from it. So very, very grateful for dear friends that have sat together in the Sangha over and over and over and over, obviously starting in our little grass hut here and then spreading out over England and then spreading out over Scotland and Wales, and then obviously a really, for our little grass hut, pivotal time when we met Ingen, because we were this little Zen group who were really a bag of frogs. And a couple of us went over to Ireland and met Ingen, and he spent so much time with us, and so much of our practice, he was talking about his dedication to practice, is because of Ingen's coming home, not staying in San Francisco, and patiently, so patiently and generously coming back. I remember how stroppy I've been and ignorant about the form. And I remember things like Ingen saying, try it for 7 years, Rebecca, before it needs to be changed. You know, just these, and how we've just all grown together. But I believe without you coming as a teacher, Ingen, and all the other teachers that have supported us, but you've been the core teacher that's kept returning. Yeah, just completely transformative, along with other teachers such as, you know, Brad and Daizan, and we've had Tibetan teachers and multiple people and hundreds of Sangha members, but such a blessing to have a home Sangha in a home. Such a blessing. So sort of, I suppose where I'm at now, it felt like I need that might be a nice way to finish. As I said earlier, I'm very blessed to have both my parents alive, and both parents that I can dialogue with about difficulty. And I feel where our relationships are so alive and turning and present and honest. And I'm really, really grateful for that, because I've felt more so with my dad, because my dad was a lot different. Since he's come back into my life in the last couple of years, physiologically, again, things have transformed for me through him and me returning to each other. So I'm very grateful for that. Obviously, deeply grateful for Rian. And he's been an amazing teacher for me during lockdown. Actually, the first lockdown, we were locked down together. And again, meeting as adults, he's really turned me. He'd be waking me up if I was sort of maybe saying something a bit anti-Trump or something. And he'd be really like seeing where I was abiding and just sort of uprooting me a little bit, you know, in my maybe a bit abiding left-wing views. And that part of everything being welcome in Zen, everything, everyone has been really important for me. So having him there sort of unlocking me a little bit, I'm very grateful for. I feel I'm even more sort of nomadic than ever, really. I'm between work, I'm between home. But it's like I'm sort of living my dream, really. When I'm sort of looking at where I'm at now, I feel I'm living my dream. And I'm very, very grateful for the conditions of my life. Back in 2015, I think it was, when I was on a retreat with Ingen, the Heart Sutra retreat, I had a voice say to me about doing priest training. And it just said, do priest training, because one other person might benefit from you doing your priest training. At this point, I'd not even taken Jukai with Reb when this voice came to me. And I was more surprised than anyone. I mean, a few friends were like, you should be doing priest training. That's not your path. And others were like, oh, it completely is. But it was just this voice. And I've had voices like that in my life that's just like, you've got to go on this, even though it doesn't make sense. Because before that time, I was very much, again, I want to be supporting other people in this land to be doing training, but that isn't my path. And then when that sort of came to me, it was like something about having faith and bowing to things outside of my own mind. And so I've been on a journey with that. And like I said, I hadn't even taken Jukai with Reb at that time. So I had the conversations with Reb. I took Jukai with Reb. I had conversations with Reb about priest training. And I'm now training with Ingen. And it feels utterly right. Utterly right. And Ingen's been training me for over 10 years, you know. And everything I know about Zen form really is, not everything, but a lot of stuff is because of Ingen. And I don't know what that means. And I have no desire to be sat doing Dharma talks, as you can imagine, because that's like one of my worst fears. Like, this is really not what I want to be doing. And that's sort of one reason I think why I purposely didn't wear my rakusu tonight. Not out of not respect, but there's something in what Zen's opened up to me that is that the teachings underneath the robes. This sort of field of the Zen practice has just opened up that everything is utterly practice. Whatever clothes you're wearing, if it's a hijab or a baseball cap or everything is relationship. So everything has got the potential for that compassion and wisdom. So I didn't do it out of disrespect. but I did it just out of the Rakasu, and the practices showed me that it's just us being us. This is it. That's it. And I've been blessed to hear those stories from people of all faiths and all continents through my life. And they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying the same thing, whatever language it's come in, whatever faith, whatever gateway they've got us to, this about connection and love and relationship, we're all saying the same thing. So I am utterly devoted to this practice and have continued to give my life to it more and more and more. But I don't know what that means. And I certainly can't see myself in any formal role doing that. But it looks like I am going to be stitching my robes, and I don't know what that's going to be. And that isn't how I saw myself, but this is just where the practice has taken me. And there's something about humility, dropping that story of self and just getting on with it. Because I absolutely want these seeds planted as richly as we can together. So, Sammy, Carol, John, Janet, Jonathan, Paddy, Tracy, Evie, Sam, Wendy, Claire, Lou, Mel, Chris, Devon, Ingen. I love you all. I'm sorry for many things, and thank you.